Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we're getting into parts 3 and 4 of History Marche's Hannibal series. Let's get into it.
In late 218 BC, Hannibal marched his forces over the Alps. But before he can confront the Romans, he first tackles his 3 immediate priorities. He resupplies and rests his exhausted men, begins rebuilding his army by recruiting new contingents of Gallic troops from the Po Valley, as his current army is only barely equal in size to a single Roman consular army. And as soon as his troops are rested, he quickly moves to secure the loyalty of Gallic tribes. Aware that loyalty, or at least compliance, cannot be guaranteed by flattery and gifts alone, Hannibal asserts his authority by making an example of the Taurini tribe, who resisted the Carthaginian advance. After a 3-day siege, he orders his troops to storm the main town of the Taurini. All of the inhabitants, men, women, and children, are massacred.
We talked about this in an earlier Hannibal video, but essentially what he's trying to do here is all of these Gallic tribes have given their nominal support to Rome, essentially out of fear of Roman intervention in their tribe, right? So they're afraid of what will happen if they don't give their support to Rome. Hannibal comes in and says, hey, we're going to take on Rome. We would like to have your support. And a lot of these tribes are like, we're still more scared of Rome than we are of you. So while we may support you in spirit, we don't actually want to give you any troops or supplies or anything of that sort because we're afraid of the reprisals from Rome if we support you openly. Well, then Hannibal goes down and says, okay, well then I'll make you fear me more than you fear Rome at this given moment. So he turns, takes his army down, destroys a village, takes all of their supplies, kills all their people, and it's his statement entering these Gallic tribe areas that you should be at least as afraid of me as you should of Rome. He's hoping that he gets more Gauls to openly support his cause because of his handling of the situation.
This calculated display of ruthlessness serves to show the Gallic tribes what is the price of hostility to the Carthaginian cause.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, on the waves off the coast of Sicily, the Carthaginians strike the first blow. In preparation for a full-scale invasion to take back the important port cities that they once held, their ships begin raiding strategic islands around Sicily. In the west, the operation is successful. But further east, while raiding the Vulcan Islands, a few Carthaginian ships are blown off course in a terrible storm. Not far from the Straits of Messina, they are eventually spotted and attacked by the Syracusan navy. The Roman ally captures 3 Carthaginian ships and their crews. Under torture, the seamen reveal details about the Carthaginian plan to attack Sicily. The Syracusan king informs his allies of this, and the Roman praetor in Sicily reacts promptly. The Romans learned that the Carthaginians have a larger fleet in the area, but that their ships are not packed with many soldiers. The Roman praetor decides to exploit this by packing each of his ships with twice as many legionnaires, effectively enabling each Roman ship crew to fight off 2 Carthaginian ships. With lookout posts set up along the shore, the Roman ambush is set. The Carthaginians close in unopposed, but as they approach their intended target, the Romans go on the offensive. They direct their ships towards one part of the Carthaginian fleet, rushing to board the enemy. In this 1 versus 1 situation, the more numerous Roman crews overwhelm the Carthaginian ships and quickly pick them off one by one. Eventually, the Carthaginian naval attack is defeated, and their attempt to gain a foothold on the island of Sicily in 218 BC fails. By this time, Consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus arrives and launches a counteroffensive along the south coast of Sicily and manages to capture Malta. He then turns back to intercept Carthaginian ships that are raiding the Vulcan Islands, Vibo and Brutium. But Longus's mission is cut short by news that Hannibal arrived in the Po Valley, and he gets summoned to bring his legions back north to help Scipio. Meanwhile, Scipio is eager to meet Hannibal in battle. With his 17-year-old son at his side, also named Publius, who will later become known as Scipio Africanus, Scipio crosses the river Po at Placentia and promptly continues west along the northern bank of the Po. Under his command are mostly less experienced troops, but Scipio is confident of defeating Hannibal. After all, in Scipio's view, he challenged Hannibal on the Rhone, and the Carthaginian general ran away.
Yeah, that's very interesting because, like we talked about in the first video, this is a huge clash between not just Rome and Carthage, but between the Barca family and the Scipio family. Scipio Africanus, the son that was just talked about there, is going to play a huge role in this conflict later on. However, the whole rush with Hannibal is that he's trying to get across the Alps, you know, before winter sets in, and they have to do the whole trek in the winter. So he doesn't run from Scipio's army, you know, on a whim or out of fear. He is specifically trying to get somewhere very quickly. So it's interesting, now that Scipio knows that he crossed the Alps, that he still would believe that he ran from that battle because he didn't want a battle. He ran because he had somewhere to get to. Hannibal wants these conflicts. You will see as we go along. He is dying to get Rome on the battlefield over and over and over again. The only real Roman strategy that has any success in the early parts of the war is not meeting Hannibal openly on a battlefield. So, a little bit of a flawed thought process for Scipio here.
Hannibal, on the other hand, is quite surprised to learn that Scipio made it back to the Po Valley so quickly. He thinks that Scipio returned with his entire army, but he has no way of knowing that in fact Scipio's troops continued on to Iberia. Thinking that the Romans now have 2 whole armies in the Po Valley, the Carthaginian general fears that this force is now strong enough to deter Gallic tribes from joining him, and he wants a victory, fast. Hannibal knows that the Gallic tribes will not rally to his banner if he doesn't seem confident of defeating Rome. Not wasting any time, he marches his army downstream along the northern bank of the Po River to meet Scipio. Still unaware of each other's exact whereabouts, the 2 generals send scouting parties well ahead of their respective armies as they march towards each other. Each army's scouts soon report the enemy's presence, and both Hannibal and Scipio proceed with caution. The Romans build a pontoon bridge over the Tichinus River and set up camp on the western bank. Meanwhile, some 15 kilometers west, the Carthaginian column also stops and encamps for the night on the flat plain. A day later, both Hannibal and Scipio ride out in force to scout the area in person, each of them eager to gain a crucial early victory, which would inspire the rest of their troops and win support of the Gallic tribes. Hannibal rides with the bulk of his horsemen, while Scipio has all of his cavalry and a small force of Velitus with him. As the 2 contingents move through the flat plain, they soon spot each other because of the clouds of dust thrown up by the hooves of their horses. Both generals decide to deploy their troops for battle. Hannibal arrays his close-order Spanish cavalry in the front and forms the Numidian light cavalry in 2 groups behind the first line. Scipio places his Velitus in the front, aiming to soften up Hannibal's cavalry with javelin throws. Gallic allies form the second line, while the Roman cavalry is in reserve. As both contingents begin closing the distance, Hannibal sees that the Roman cavalry is fewer in number and makes a split-second decision not to engage in skirmishing with the Roman Velitus. Instead, he orders a full-blooded charge against the Roman front line. Scipio quickly responds by leading his cavalry forward, as the Velites withdraw through the gaps to form a second line, without even managing a single javelin volley due to the onrushing Carthaginians. A few moments later, the cavalry clashes in the center. A fierce, bloody, static melee develops, unlike the usual mobile cavalry encounters of the time. The horses panic in the chaotic close quarters fighting, and many horsemen dismount in order to fight more effectively on foot. For a while the fighting seems indecisive, but this was another ruse by Hannibal. He waits until most of the Roman cavalry is fully committed, and then sends his Numidians on a flanking maneuver.
This is something that Hannibal is absolutely great at. He's great at holding down troops while other groups are doing something else. His tactical maneuverability on the battlefield is something he displays brilliance at over and over and over again. He's really great with the cavalry. He's really great at outflanking opponents. He knows what he's doing tactically. And so in a lot of these situations, whenever the Romans come in and the clash starts and the Romans feel like, okay, things are going well, or at least things are kind of at a stalemate, chances are Hannibal is working on something else somewhere else, right? So that stalemate is going to give quickly because Hannibal is not actually fighting a stalemate. He's actually fighting something, a flanking action or something, a flanking action at this battle. But he's always doing something else. It's never what it seems with Hannibal.
This catches the Romans totally by surprise. Velites on the flanks spot the envelopment, and some of them panic and flee. The fast Numidian cavalry quickly flows around the Roman flanks and tramples over the scattered light infantry. And then the noose begins to tighten around the Roman contingent. In the melee, Scipio is struck down from his horse. Carthaginian troops close in to finish off the wounded general, but at the final moment he is rescued. One early account of his rescue holds that a Ligurian slave saved the Roman consul, but the more popular version claims that his 17-year-old son Publius charged to rescue his father with a small group of Roman cavalry that clustered around the consul before retreating back towards the Roman camp. As word of Hannibal's victory spreads, Gallic tribes send emissaries to pledge their support. But despite their promises, the Gauls deliver little in the way of reinforcements and supplies during this early stage of the war. This forces Hannibal, whose army goes critically low on food in late 218 BC, to send a cavalry contingent to capture a Roman grain depot at Clastidium, guarded by a Roman garrison. Luckily for Hannibal, the garrison commander is from Brundisium in southern Italy, and when confronted he willingly surrenders the depot and, in return for 400 gold pieces, joins the Carthaginian ranks together with the entire garrison. These troops become the first of the Italian allies to defect and join Hannibal. Meanwhile, the Roman army retreats to Placentia, where they plan to wait for Sempronius and his consular army.
This cavalry skirmish, it has completely changed the thought process and mindset of the elder Scipio here. He, at first, was ready to jump into battle, ready to hand Hannibal an early defeat, very much getting caught up, swept up in kind of the whatever it's historians have different names for it, but the idea that Rome is exceptional to everybody and everything, this kind of Roman exceptionalism idea, he is very much getting swept up into that when the war starts, whenever Hannibal runs away from the first contact that they have. After this meeting where he is wounded, and it's hard to tell if it's just because Hannibal so outsmarted him here, or if, like Longus suggests later, that it's born from him actually being wounded and it's made him more hesitant. He definitely has a change of frame of mind here on how the Romans should handle Hannibal.
Although the defeat at the river Ticinus is far from a major loss, it nevertheless reinforces the apprehension with which the Romans would view Hannibal from now on, and it sets a psychological tone which would be felt in the much larger battles to come. After the
Okay, so that was part 3. We're going to go ahead and do part 4 here right now, and then we'll do part 5 tomorrow.
Defeat at Ticinus, the Roman Senate looks to save face by blaming Gallic allies for being ineffective. Taking comfort in the fact that Hannibal has yet to face the vaunted Roman infantry, long as his arrival to northern Italy restores confidence. Hannibal now faces armies of both Roman consuls.
Again, the idea that because there's more than one consular army here, that this is bad for Hannibal. All of the writings suggest that Hannibal loves this. He wants as many Romans on that battlefield as possible because it makes the defeat worse for the Romans. So he has such high regards for his tactics, generalship, and the army that he has around him that he wants more Romans on the battlefield because he's not worried about getting overwhelmed. He thinks no matter how many there are, we can pull out the win, and the more there are, the worse it'll be for Rome on the back end.
It's early December 218 BC. Publius Scipio's life still hangs in the balance due to wounds he sustained at Ticinus. But, ironically, his troubles are only just starting. His defeat at Ticinus has major consequences for Rome. It directly caused the garrison at Clastidium to surrender the town's massive grain depot. This strips his army of food reserves and disrupts his supply lines, making any advance into enemy territory a risky venture. At the same time, Hannibal finally replenishes his own reserves, which were dwindling ever since he descended from the Alps, right until the clash at Ticinus just a few days ago. The damage to Roman prestige raises the danger of further defections. What's worse, Gallic tribes are flocking to join Hannibal, enthused by his ability to defeat the Romans and his softer administrative touch. Scipio has no option but to retreat, realizing he is deep in hostile territory. He marches to Placentia and makes camp across the Po River. Hannibal pursues and catches up 2 days later. Learning of his arrival, over 2,000 Gauls allied to Rome rise up in the camp and attack Roman soldiers, killing many in their sleep. Before sunrise, they cross the Trebia to join Hannibal, bringing with them the severed heads of slain Romans. Using the Gallic defection as propaganda, Hannibal makes sure to spread the word that Rome's allies are joining him en masse, thereby boosting his popularity among the tribes. Scipio again moves south, not wanting to risk being caught in the open. A day later, he reaches the hills and sets up camp in a strong position, with hills protecting his flanks from cavalry attacks. Then he settles in and waits for reinforcements. By mid-December, the two consuls join forces. Discussing how to confront Hannibal, Scipio argues against taking the field, stressing that Longus's troops lack experience and need additional training, having been...
And this is the whole thing here. Because Rome initially, when this first starts, and the whole thing happens with the initial, battle at Saguntum and the argument over which side of the river, if it's in Rome territory or whether it's in New Carthage or Carthaginian territory. Ever since that started, Rome sent out legions all over the place, right? Not expecting a major attack on mainland Italy. The recruits that they have there are raw recruits for the most part. The ones that aren't raw recruits have been getting they've been getting the brakes beaten off of them before this war even starts. So this is a very green army that the Romans have under them right now. And honestly, it would probably be better historically if Longus and his army had just not shown up here. Because Scipio has already kind of learned that he has to be cautious with Hannibal. Longus has not learned that yet, so it's going to end up being a major, major issue. And Longus is going to learn it.
Been raised less than a year ago. Longus disagrees and sets up camp a few kilometers north from Scipio's position. Just as eager to fight as Longus, Hannibal maintains his camp on the flat plain and surveys the potential battlefield west of the Trebia River. Meanwhile, he sends a raiding party to ravage the area along the river, suspecting that Gallic tribes living there, who pledged allegiance to him, are now negotiating with the Romans. It's unclear if the Gauls intended to betray Hannibal, but with their villages now being raided, some of the tribesmen appeal to the Romans for help. Longus promptly sends 1,000 Velitus across the river to attack the raiders. With Hannibal's troops scattered across the area and encumbered by plunder, Roman troops start picking off small groups of Carthaginians, quickly routing the raiders. Seeing this, troops on duty outside Hannibal's camp rush to the aid of the retreating raiding party. The fighting is fierce, as both sides want to prove their superiority, but the Roman Velitus are soon forced into a fighting retreat. The skirmish escalates rapidly, spreading across a large area. More and more troops from each side join in. Pockets of clashes develop as neither side is able to shore up its ranks. It becomes apparent that the chaotic skirmish might turn into a full-scale battle that neither commander will be able to control. Hannibal takes the initiative. He stops sending more troops into the fray, trying to avoid a battle that he did not plan and can do little to influence. He then audaciously rides out in person and rallies the scattered troops. He pulls them back and arrays them in a line outside the camp. The Romans advance, but Hannibal restrains his men from charging the enemy. The Romans too halt their advance, refusing to attack the well-positioned Carthaginians, who can now be supported from the camp with projectiles and fresh troops. The day draws to a close. Hannibal demonstrates his shrewdness by not committing to an uncertain battle, and by restraining his troops, he exhibits what he would become so famous for: his extraordinary ability to exercise control over his army. Romans retire towards their camp, satisfied at scoring a victory against Hannibal's troops, their morale and confidence partially restored. Longus, who is described by sources as having an aggressive temperament, shows his eagerness to do battle as soon as possible. He won't have to wait long. At dawn, Roman guards sound the alarm. The Carthaginians are attacking the camp. Awoken to projectiles flying over the palisades, Roman troops are ordered to get ready for battle. On empty stomachs, the men rush to form up in front of their tents in frigid conditions. Longus sends all 4,000 of his cavalry against the Numidians, closely followed by 6,000 Velitus. But the Numidians soon break off. As the fighting moves north, the fast cavalrymen engage in hit-and-run attacks. Longus marches out with the rest of his army to meet the enemy. Heavy infantry forms into 3 columns, each some 3.5 kilometers long. They lag behind the cavalry and Velitus, but make steady progress. Numidians continue to avoid a direct confrontation with the Roman cavalry and Velitus. Meanwhile, Hannibal gathers his officers to lay out his plans. He offers words of encouragement and orders them to ready the men for battle. Well-rested and well-fed, Carthaginian troops take to the field. To the east, the skirmish continues. Numidians find themselves backed against the Trebia. They start crossing the river as they continue to pull back, pursued by the Romans. Arriving with the infantry and eager for battle, Longus orders the army to deploy on the western bank. The three columns begin crossing, chest deep in the freezing water.
Yeah, so you have a whole handful of things happening here that are to Hannibal's plan, right? One, you have the Romans woken up right at the beginning of the morning to the sound of the camp alarms, right? So they think that the whole thing's being attacked. They don't know if it's just cavalry or if it's a full-scale attack. So everybody's up and grabbing their arms and all that immediately. Not only that, then when the Numidian cavalry starts to retreat, Longus sends out the entire army. So you go from just waking up and figuring out what's going on to everybody lace up, go outside in the freezing cold weather, right? So you're up early, you don't eat, it's freezing outside, but then also on Hannibal's side, the Numidian cavalry are the only ones that have to cross the Trebia. That's a big deal because it's freezing outside right now. The entire Roman army is going to have to cross that river. Then when they get to the other side, they're going to have to form up. I don't know how much everybody knows about how armies form up at this time period, but it is not very well done, especially with raw recruit troops. It takes a long time. It's done with flags and signals, and it takes a long time to get, all of the troops scattered out in good order to line up for the battle. So all of that is going on the Roman side, and then on the Carthaginian side, none of that is going on. I mean, literally, Hannibal gets everybody together, or gets the generals together, explains what's going on, has everybody get up, eat, sit around the fire, get everything ready, and then once they see the Romans coming across the river, they go out and deploy for battle. So you have all of these bad things kind of happening one on top of the other on the Roman side, and literally none of them happening on the Carthaginian side. And also, the Romans are now trapped, more or less. The Trebia River is to their back. So, if they get routed here, they're going to be in some trouble.
Meanwhile, Hannibal sends 8,000 infantry forward to support the Numidian retreat and to provide a screen for his own deployment. He then moves his main line about 1 kilometer towards the approaching Romans. Across the field, Longus's army takes several hours to deploy. After fording the cold Trebia, his men are hungry, soaked, and standing in the near-freezing temperature. The Roman consul places his velotus in the front, forms his veteran infantry in the center, with Gallic and allied infantry on either side, and cavalry on the flanks. Hannibal deploys his infantry in a thin line. Gallic allies in the center, with Spanish and Libyan infantry on either side. Elephants flank the infantry, while the Numidian and Gallic cavalry is further wide. Around noon, Longus orders his entire line to advance, confident in the clear numerical advantage of his heavy infantry. The Romans advance in good order. The flat plain, free of any obstacles, seems an ideal battleground for their style of warfare. Meanwhile, Hannibal holds the line, letting the enemy come to him. Skirmishers get into range and begin exchanging projectiles. With Balearic slingers in their ranks, combining with javelin men, the Carthaginians quickly gain the upper hand against the Roman velotus, who used up many of their javelins while pursuing the Numidian cavalry earlier in the day. Skirmishers from both sides withdraw through the gaps as the main lines of infantry close in. The heavier, more compact Roman infantry pushes the Carthaginian line back, causing heavy casualties to Hannibal's Gallic infantry in the center. On the flanks, Hannibal orders his cavalry to push forward. Some of the Roman horses become frightened by Hannibal's elephants, causing...
Yeah, so the elephants is something we should probably talk about. If you are Roman and you were born and raised in Italy, chances are you grew up on a farm and have never seen anything that even remotely resembles what an elephant looks like. There are some Romans that had, some that lived in a particular city at a particular time, or that had traveled to particular places. But the majority of the Romans that would be fighting in this army had never seen an elephant, and obviously, because elephants are kind of unique in the animal world, would have never seen anything that even remotely resembled what an elephant looks like. So imagine not only the horse's reaction to whatever this massive thing is in front of them, but imagine the people, the soldiers. They've never seen anything like this before. What would your first thought be? Like, that they have like monsters? That they have like these I don't know, these alien animals from another planet that they've brought here to kill you with? Like, I always just think of how bizarre that first thought would be when you see one of these African elephants, running at you. So the Roman cavalry and the Roman horses have a really tough time dealing with the elephants at this first battle.
Disruption within the ranks. But groups of Roman velitas, specially trained to deal with elephants, mix with the cavalry and attack the terrifying beasts, wounding and killing many. Eventually, the Numidians managed to overwhelm and advance against the Roman cavalry. But despite Roman flanks being pushed back, the Carthaginian center is crumbling. Veteran legionnaires are hacking through the Gallic infantry. Without any reinforcements available, it seems that Hannibal cannot stop the onslaught. But
again, we talked about this earlier, but if there is something happening that it's a stalemate, or you feel like you're winning in a particular area against Hannibal, normally it's on purpose. It's like a diversion, or they're kind of just holding their spot there for a certain amount of time. But it's for a reason. And just like we said, it is for a reason. They are about to come attack them from the rear. It is definitely for a reason.
But what the Romans don't know is that while surveying the field on the eve of battle, Hannibal personally picked 2,000 elite troops and positioned them in a dry riverbed, hidden from view. Now they emerge from the ravine with perfect timing, just as the Numidians finally rout the Roman cavalry, poised to encircle the enemy. Hard pressed from the front by elephants, Carthaginian infantry and skirmishers, the wings of the Roman infantry buckle as the Numidians attack their rear. Meanwhile, Hannibal's center collapses as the veteran Roman heavy infantry cuts right through the Carthaginian line, still unaffected by the encirclement thanks to their discipline and organization. However, realizing the battle is lost, the legionnaires retreat back across the river to Placentia, maintaining their battle formation. Roman casualties are heavy, likely around 28,000 dead or wounded, while the Carthaginian losses are much lower, between 3,000 and 5,000. Losing most of his elephants, possibly all but one, is the only major loss for Hannibal at Trebia.
Yeah, because Hannibal uses the elephants as a big part of the push at the Trebia, he loses a lot of them. Now, we know at least one survives because Hannibal will be riding on one later in this thing. But that's a pretty big loss, because you see at the Trebia how effective they can be, how well they can hold off cavalry pushes, how much they can tie down some of the Roman infantry. So they lose the majority of them for sure. We don't know exactly how many. We don't have the numbers exactly, but loses a lot of them. But they completely wipe out the Roman army here. The reason that the group of Romans that were able to retreat is just because of how well trained they were. Right? So once everything happened, they were able to stay in their battle formation and retreat in good order back across the river, And it was strictly because of their training, them being the well-trained troops here, that they were able to survive. Everybody else that got left got wiped out.
Just a matter of weeks, Hannibal outperformed both Roman consuls with superior planning, near-perfect coordination, and control of his troops. News of the defeat rocks the Roman Senate and causes widespread panic among the population. The damage to Roman prestige persuades many more Gauls to join Hannibal. Additional attacks on Roman outposts and towns cause further disruption, before cold weather finally forces armies of both sides into winter quarters. But as Hannibal's devastating campaign in Italy gains momentum, a seemingly minor event in Iberia could threaten the Carthaginian war effort in the long run.
Okay, so that was History Marches Hannibal Part 3 and 4. I'll get to Part 5 probably tomorrow, and I'll keep getting into the Napoleon series, and I'll see you guys then.